Wasn't that technique session with Joey McKenna incredible? I know you're going to get to work and you're start practicing what you just learned, but we just don't want to make you a better wrestler. We want to make you a better follower of Jesus. So we're going to look at technique, but we're also going to look at truth, the truth of God's word. And as we walk through the Gospel of John, we're looking at different miracles that Jesus performed. Now, he did all these miracles so that he could show that he was the Messiah and so that people would believe in him. And our goal is that you would believe, not just some fairy tale version of Christianity, but a real faith that meets you right where you're at. So we're going to look at the fourth miracle. And the title for this little section, this teaching, is going to be called The Miracle in the Scarcity. And we're going to look at the miracle where Jesus fed the 5,000. Now, this is the only miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels. That's important to know, because the fact that all four of the Gospel writers would make mention of this underscores the significance of this miracle. And the synoptic Gospels, you might have heard that term before, but synoptic just means everybody sharing their vantage point. So four different authors that saw the exact same thing kind of brought their version or what they remember about it to the table. Some people would say that because these are a little bit different, they conflict with each other. Not at all. They complement each other. Each is added together to weave together the rich tapestry of Jesus feeding the masses. Now, it's recorded in John chapter 6. That's where it's going to be. I want to actually jump over to Mark to give a little bit of what Mark says with this and then hop back to John. So I'm going to flip to Mark chapter 6 here. I'm going to start in verse 30. Let me give you a little context, what has just happened with this. Jesus has sent the 12 disciples out in pairs of two, and they're performing miracles, they're driving out demons, they're healing people, and they come back to Jesus. Now, what has also happened at this point is John the Baptist has been beheaded. Herod cuts his head off, serves it up on a platter, and Jesus has just heard the news that his dear friend has been beheaded. So Jesus gets that news at the same time the disciples are coming back to him, and they're exhausted. They are tired. They are wiped out. So we pick up the scene in Mark 6, verse 30. It says, the apostles gathered around Jesus, reported all they'd done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they didn't even have a chance to eat. Now that they're hungry, we know that. And he said to them, come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest. So they're tired and they're exhausted. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been at the place that you're just kind of at the end of yourself and you've got nothing left to give? Some dad who's a coach is watching this is like, man, I'm giving everything I can to my marriage and I don't feel like we're getting ahead. I'm giving everything I can to this school and I'm underappreciated. I'm giving everything I can to my kids and it doesn't feel like it makes a difference. Can you identify? That's where the disciples were. That's where Jesus is. The Gospel of John gives a humanity of Christ that allows us to see that he's fully God and fully man. So Jesus says, hey, let's go to the other side. And so verse 32, it says, so they went away by themselves to a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So when Jesus saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Now it's interesting. The disciples heard Jesus say, come with me, let's get some rest. So was Jesus lying? Because Jesus knew what was going to be waiting for him on the other side of the lake. Jesus knew that all these people were going to be there asking him and wanting stuff from him. Maybe our version of rest is very different than what God has in mind. We always think rest is maybe just binge watching Netflix and just kind of chilling out. But rest is connected more to purpose than it is sleep. And that's what Jesus, he's going to perform this miracle and he's going to use what the disciples don't think they have to illustrate that he is all things and he can do all things. So the disciples, they're going along this boat. They think it's going to be like this quiet little cruise. Let's get some rest. But now they see all the people walking on the hillside, coming to the place where they're going to land. And they're like, yo, I thought we're supposed to get some rest. I just wanted a Big Mac. I just wanted to chill a little bit. And Jesus sees the people and his heart is broken for them. And now I want to flip back over to John. And I want to show the miracle in the scarcity because they're exhausted, they're tired, and now Jesus is going to add a whole nother layer on top of it. Verse 5 of John 6, it says, when Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming. And he said to Philip, one of the disciples, he says, where should we buy bread for all these people to eat? And now Jesus is looking at the disciples say, feed them. They're looking at him going, Jesus, it's late. Bojangles is closed, man. The grocery store isn't open. Send them away so they can get something to eat. And Jesus looks at them and says, you give them something to eat. Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? And he's like, I got nothing for you. It's the miracle in the scarcity. Because we keep looking at we don't have and we think we can't do what Jesus has called us to do. This is an unreasonable request. Do you know that the real version of Jesus makes unreasonable demands? Do you know that the real version of Jesus doesn't want to settle for our comfortable complacency? He doesn't want to settle for our decisions that are driven way more by our comfort. He wants us to do something we've never done before. And how can I give something, Jesus, I don't have? They're exhausted and they're supposed to encourage other people. They're tired and they're supposed to give other people rest. They're hungry. Remember that. They didn't eat. And yet they're supposed to feed somebody else. That's the paradox of faith. It's this miracle in the scarcity, because in our version of Christianity, we think that God is going to bless all my strengths. We think that God can really use the best, the brightest, the smartest. Nope. Just like we talked about a couple miracles ago, that Jesus picked the common vessels, not the ornate ones on the table, but the common vessels that everybody else walked past. And we keep thinking, if I get better, then God can use me. Nope. One of the names of God in the Bible is Jehovah Jireh, and it means that God is my provider. That is easy to talk about. But the only way that you will ever believe he's a provider is if you go through something where you lack. Do you know that your scarcity is a miracle? Do you know that is a gap that God has created for his gift to fill? Do you know that God has brought you into situations that you don't feel like you have what it takes? And God says, I am more than enough. You will never know that God can do the impossible unless you're staring at the impossible. You will never see that God is the great I am unless you feel like I can't. You are set up and you are positioned for a miracle if you are staring at a situation that you've been intimidated by. And too many times before you have walked away from it because you don't feel like you could do it. But this is the moment that you're going to do what the disciples did, and you're going to stand in it. You're not going to run from it, and you will start to see that God is your provider. But unless there's a gap, there's nothing for him to provide. And sometimes what we want is a version of Christianity that we don't have any struggles, where we don't have any challenges, where we have it all taken care of. And often we'll pray prayers that actually want Jesus out of the scene. Here's what I mean by that, is we'll often pray prayers that make life easier for us. And God said, if life got easier for you, you would not be dependent upon me. This is a situation that required complete dependence upon Jesus. And what's funny about the question he asked in John 6 about this miracle is when he asked Philip, where shall we buy bread for all these people? It goes on in verse 6, it says, he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Isn't that amazing? Like, Jesus has already got the supply, but will you believe me enough to trust me in a season of uncertainty? And what happens is where you don't, often in our faith, if we don't see how it's going to work out or we don't think it's going to work out, we'll walk away because we don't see there being a way. But the only way that we'll know that God is truly the answer, that he is the provider, is if you stand there and let him give something that you didn't think you had access to. Let me tell it to you this way. My wife and I, we've got 4 kids. And I remember when we brought our firstborn home from the hospital. He's 14 now. And it made me flash back to when I was a kid, when I was a 13-year-old and 14-year-old. I made the varsity wrestling team in 7th grade. And the only one in the school to ever do it. And I was so proud of him. My older brother, Butch, was on the team. His real name is Leslie, but if you were named Leslie, you'd go by Butch too. And so went to this wrestling meet first wrestling meets, I'm wrestling a guy who's a junior in high school. He placed top 8 in the state the year before, and I lost 9-2. But my dad was at the meet. My dad struggled with alcoholism his whole life. And what was handed to him by his father, he carried on. And he showed up at my very first wrestling meet, he was drunk. And I remember him walking into the stands. I could still hear the sound of his boots walking up the steps. And after I lost that match, everybody's like, "You did great, Larry, you did great." All I heard was my dad yelling, "Just wait till you get home, boy. Just wait till you get home." And it wasn't good when I got home. And so when I was about to have my son, I struggled with how can I be a good father for him, because I didn't have the image of what a good father looked like. And I so felt God speak into my spirit. That gap that you think you have, I can fill it. And I can be for you what you need to be. And if any of you are staring at situations in your life that you don't feel like you have what it takes, and there's a lack, there's a scarcity, I want to tell you, you are positioned for a miracle. Because what these disciples had to do is Philip, he went and beat up a kid and took his little Captain D's snack pack with a couple fish and a couple loaves, and they put it into the hands of Christ and they fed the multitudes. But the miracle is in the scarcity. And I want to tell you that you have what it takes because you've got Christ inside of you. And the gap is a gift to create dependence upon Christ. I know it's tough being a junior in high school. I know it is so tough when all your friends are pressuring you to go a certain way and to do a certain thing. And I can't, God's got you. He's in you. And you have more than enough in you to do everything that he's called you to do.